I remember before he died that he said, it's not my fault. I am not well. This happened to me. I've had it all my life. And so he understood, right, at that point. And I was like, Theo, it's not your fault. And we know that. And for the other people that might not really understand, it's sad that they couldn't understand that. My name is Saki Cabrera, and I actually work with the president of NAMI, California, over by the Fairfield. I am a Human Services and Psychology faculty member, and I also run the board, and I also run the program. My relationship with someone with a mental health diagnosis, I have many family members, but the one today that I would like to highlight is my uncle who has passed away. And we grew up with him, and my mother was very instrumental in making sure that he was well, because that was her younger brother, and his diagnosis was schizophrenia. If you look at all the symptoms that are associated with someone who's diagnosed with schizophrenia, poor peer play, poor muscle skills, kind of a word salad, the inability to kind of focus and really streamline intentional thoughts. My uncle has had it since he was a kid in talking to my mother. They're from Puerto Rico. And so that's why she was so close to him. They were a year apart, and she was like kind of his caregiver. She didn't know life without him. And so in me, obviously being born years later, I've always known him to be that way. He progressively got worse, but he's always been, ay, that's Theo. And only we can understand him, right? Because we grew up with him. So his rate of speech, although it's in a language that we understand, it's Spanish, even if you spoke Spanish, you were kind of like, I don't understand him. And it wasn't because you didn't know Spanish. It was because of the other symptoms that happened with people who have schizophrenia at that time. So that's all I know. That's all I know. I think with my uncle that was instrumental in coming from I'm first generation born in the States. So my entire family is from Puerto Rico, right? So you have that whole Latino culture that takes care of their own. And there's a certain regimen of what's appropriate and what's not. And I think, from understanding of what I've learned about my uncle before, right, when he was younger, he wasn't able to hold down a marriage, right? His kids probably weren't able to understand him, right, because of that inability to hold that linear kind of thinking and that word salad scramble. He wasn't able to hold down a job. So in terms of how it affected family, his own nuclear family, he wasn't able to keep that intact. And then us, because our roots are, people think of family like mother, father, right, sister and brother. No, our family's our family. We're all together. It affected us bringing friends over, and they would be like, what's your uncle doing, right? And we can't understand him. Feelings of grandiosity. He often talked about he needed bigger shoes. And it wasn't that his shoes were tight, but that grandeur feeling. And it affected us when it started to become a safety issue, safety to self and safety to others. When, you hear things or you hear certain messages that are telling you to protect yourself. And as humans, when we protect ourselves, it could also include harming someone else. And so, when the younger cousins don't really understand that, you have to try to explain that to different generations from a mental health background. I am trained now, right? So I have the words, I have the training, I have the experiences with over 25 years being in this field. But when you kind of narrow it down to just being a family member, an aunt, an uncle, a fellow sister, brother, it's tough because you have to protect, and yet you have to be very sensitive to the person who's on the other side, right? And maybe not as empathetic when you're talking about unsafe actions to others. So it takes a lot of family relations to continue to be tight and make sure that person is not seen as an outsider. But again, when you talk about cultural norms, we take care of our own, right? We're not going to send them off to be hospitalized because that would be deemed completely inappropriate. And we're all living, although not well, but we're living in our own spaces. So in the beginning, it was about trying to get them compliant to meds. But if you take medications and you don't like the symptoms, then you're going to be non-compliant. So that up and down. And there were many times that it was scary. He would go to Puerto Rico, we don't know where he is, come back, not come back in a way that manifests wellness, taken advantage of in different ways, often carried cash, where did he go, where did he live, where can we find him? And this is when he was non-compliant to medication. And I think it became to a point where we realized as a family unit that we can't do it, right? Trying to convince your elders. You are not clinicians. You can't be there 24/7. And most importantly, you're getting older yourselves, right? You're getting older yourselves. Your health is failing now. Let's get him the help he needs. And that's when he was able to get the clinical diagnosis and be, right, more compliant on his meds, and eventually go into, we're from the Bronx, right in the Bronx, where wonderful facility, had his own room, was able to play his guitar. My uncle played guitar all the time, was able to attend church, was able to go on outings, so right, and we can still visit him. And that, I remember before he died, that he said, it's not my fault. I am not well. This happened to me. I've had it all my life. And so he understood, right, at that point. And I was like, Theo, it's not your fault. And we know that. And for the other people that might not really understand, it's sad that they couldn't understand that. So he got to a place where he understood that he wasn't well and he had to take his meds, because he would hide them, right? Even in this place, to be non-compliant. And we would have to just continue that communication. And it doesn't matter how educated you are. It's about empathizing. It's about, understanding where they are and being genuine and finding love and value in those connections, especially when you don't understand their experience. And that's what empathy is all about. Not feeling sorry for them, but trying to understand them and get them the resources they need, which includes professional help. And I think we all as a family understood that, and he did too. The bridge from people living in poverty, people that are living in lower socioeconomic status, people who are not educated, people who don't know how to, maneuver through the systems. We were kids. Right, we were kids, and putting kids in a position to have to translate and interpret, it's just, you don't do that. But if you can't speak the language and you're not educated, then how do you traverse a system that is really, really difficult enough if you do speak English and you are educated? I don't want to say the system failed, but it continues to fail communities that English is not their priority language, that they don't understand and have access. And it's not about being in this country and speaking English. It's about valuing the diversity in this country, and that we are Latinos and we do speak English and Spanish, and some are stronger in Spanish than English, right, in their native tongues. And these concepts, you need to talk to them and be able to explain these concepts in ways that not only they can understand, but that family members can understand, so they can be that support system for compliance. That was lacking and continues to be lacking. That language barrier, I think those cultural norms as well, addressing and valuing how we like to take care of our own people, but we can do that and still get them the proper treatment. It's not a either or, and there's not a shame in that. I think there still needs to be a lot more done to that. And just, access in general for people in poverty, that you have a lot of barriers because of health insurance and what they will and will not cover based on need, especially when it's crisis and intervention. Things like housing, right? And who's living in the house and who can live in an apartment when it's when it's funded by public aid, but it's because of a medical condition. I mean, there's still a lot of paperwork in that, and how then it might negatively affect the person who's helping them if they too are on public assistance. There's just so many things for people who are low socioeconomic status, cultural norm, as I said, to take care of their own and not find shape, and just outreach, to continue to reduce the stigma. As my uncle said, this happened to me. This is not my fault. I mean, I just remember it in Spanish. This is not my fault. I can't control it. Why don't they understand? And that's why I want to do this, to honor him. To say, Theo, you are going to help many people with us being loved by you and being able to see, how you lived, and hopefully that'll help to create more advocacy and encourage other Latinos to get help, to outreach, and to know that we need to do it together. I think there needs to be a lot more compassion, a lot more education. But at the end of the day, we're all people. We're all people with different experiences, different lives. And for me, thank God that God didn't make us all the same. That would be like way too boring, right? So to see it as diversity, and diversity in the way the human mind and body presents itself, I think is where we need to start. But to give him a voice that he could help this community understand his experience. And I'm so grateful for that, because I love my tío so much.